The grand ballroom of Buckingham Palace sparkled under the crystal chandeliers, filled with Britain's most influential figures. Queen Camilla moved gracefully through the crowd, her emerald gown catching the light as she engaged with guests at the annual Royal Foundation Charity Gala. This evening was supposed to celebrate the monarchy's charitable work, but beneath the polished surface, tensions simmered that would soon explode into public view. Prince William stood near the main entrance, greeting arrivals with his characteristic warmth. His navy dress uniform bore the insignia of his military honors, yet those who knew him well could detect the subtle signs of strain around his eyes. The past months had been challenging for the Prince of Wales, dealing with his father's health concerns and the increasing responsibilities of his role as heir to the throne. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, had been unable to attend due to her own health recovery, leaving William to navigate the evening's social obligations alone. This absence felt particularly acute tonight, as family dynamics within the palace had grown increasingly complex since King Charles's coronation. Camilla approached a group of prominent donors, her smile radiant as always. She had worked tirelessly to establish herself as a worthy queen consort, supporting numerous charitable causes and gradually winning over public opinion. However, those closest to the royal family knew that her relationship with William remained delicate, built on mutual respect but lacking the warmth she shared with Harry during his earlier years in the family. The evening's program included presentations about various charitable initiatives. William was scheduled to speak about his Earthshot Prize environmental project, while Camilla would address her literacy campaign. As the formal presentations began, guests gathered in the palace's state dining room, where portraits of previous monarchs gazed down upon the assembled crowd. Lord Pemberton, the palace's longtime protocol officer, noticed something unusual in Camilla's demeanor as she reviewed her speech notes. She seemed unusually focused, almost determined in a way that made him slightly uncomfortable. After 30 years of palace service, he had developed an instinct for detecting when royal events might not proceed according to plan. The Archbishop of Canterbury offered the evening's opening blessing, his words about service and dedication resonating through the ornate room. King Charles, though present, appeared somewhat fatigued, occasionally leaning on his walking stick as he stood for various portions of the ceremony. His recent health challenges had aged him visibly, adding weight to William's shoulders as the next in line. As dinner progressed, conversations flowed around tables adorned with white roses and gold accents. Lady Margaret Thornfield, a close family friend, sat between William and Camilla, noting the polite but distant interaction between stepmother and stepson. Their exchanges remained cordial, discussing charitable work and upcoming royal engagements, but lacked the easy familiarity that characterized William's relationships with other family members. The palace staff moved efficiently through their duties, serving course after course while maintaining the impeccable standards expected at royal functions. Head butler James Morrison had overseen hundreds of such events, yet he sensed an undercurrent of tension that evening. Perhaps it was the way Camilla kept glancing at her watch, or how William seemed more reserved than usual in his interactions. During the main course, Camilla excused herself briefly, claiming she needed to review her upcoming speech. She walked purposefully toward the palace's private quarters, her heels clicking against the marble floors of corridors lined with priceless artwork. Palace security, accustomed to royal movements during events, noted her departure but thought nothing unusual of it. In her private study, Camilla opened a locked drawer in her antique writing desk. Inside lay a folder containing documents that could alter the royal family's future forever. These were not state secrets or scandalous revelations, but rather personal correspondence and financial records that painted a picture of family dynamics and decisions that had never been made public. The documents detailed private conversations about succession planning, including discussions about William's future role and the modernization of the monarchy. More significantly, they contained Camilla's own thoughts and recommendations about how the royal family should evolve, suggestions that went far beyond her traditional role as queen consort. Meanwhile, back in the dining room, William delivered his speech about environmental conservation with his usual passion. His words about protecting the planet for future generations resonated strongly with the audience, who responded with enthusiastic applause. However, those watching closely noticed that his eyes occasionally drifted toward the empty chair where Camilla should have been sitting. When Camilla returned to the dining room, she carried herself differently. There was a new resolve in her posture, a determination that had not been there earlier in the evening. She took her place at the head table just as the evening's final speaker was concluding his remarks, setting the stage for her own presentation. The moment arrived for Camilla to address the gathering. She rose from her seat with the dignity expected of a queen consort, but those who knew her best detected something different in her manner. Her private secretary, Lady Elizabeth Hartwell, felt a flutter of concern as she noticed Camilla's speech cards had been replaced with different notes entirely. As Camilla approached the podium, the room fell silent in respectful attention. The assembled guests expected to hear about literacy programs and educational initiatives, causes she had championed for years. Instead, she began with words that would forever change the trajectory of the royal family's future. She spoke first about duty and service, themes familiar to any royal address. However, her tone carried in weight that suggested more significant revelations to come. William, sitting at the head table, initially smiled politely, assuming this was simply Camilla's characteristic thoroughness in addressing serious topics. The turning point came when Camilla shifted from discussing charitable work to addressing the future of the monarchy itself. She began to outline her vision for how the royal family should evolve to remain relevant in modern Britain. Her words carried the authority of someone who had spent years observing and analyzing the institution from within. What stunned the audience was not just the content of her remarks, but her decision to make these thoughts public in such a formal setting. Traditionally, discussions about the monarchy's future direction remained private family matters, addressed behind closed doors rather than in public forums. William's expression gradually changed as he realized the significance of what was happening. His stepmother was not simply giving a speech about charity work. She was outlining fundamental changes to royal protocol and succession planning that had never been discussed publicly before. The assembled guests, initially polite in their attention, began to sense they were witnessing something historically significant. Phones remained respectfully tucked away, but the tension in the room became palpable as Camilla continued her unprecedented address. Palace staff members exchanged concerned glances as they realized the evening was departing dramatically from the planned program. The king's private secretary discreetly moved closer to the head table, ready to intervene if necessary, while security personnel remained alert for any signs of disruption among the guests. As Camilla spoke about modernizing royal traditions and adapting to contemporary British society, her words carried implications that went far beyond ceremonial changes. She was essentially proposing a fundamental restructuring of how the monarchy operated, suggestions that traditionally would require extensive private consultation before any public discussion. William maintained his composure with the skill developed through years of royal training, but those who knew him well could see the shock and concern building behind his diplomatic facade. This was not a conversation he had expected to have in such a public setting, and certainly not without prior family consultation. The atmosphere in the room grew increasingly charged as guests began to fully comprehend the historical significance of what they were witnessing. This was not simply a charity gala anymore. It had become a moment that would be remembered and analyzed for years to come. Lord Pemberton, standing near the back of the room, felt his decades of palace experience gone. Something unprecedented was unfolding. In all his years of service, he had never witnessed a senior royal family member make such significant policy statements without prior coordination with other family members. As Camilla continued her address, building toward revelations that would stun even those most familiar with royal family dynamics, the evening transformed from a routine charitable function into a defining moment in modern royal history. The consequences of her words would ripple through the palace, the media, and the British public for months to come. The stage was set for revelations that would challenge everything the public thought they knew about the royal family's private dynamics and future plans. William's silent reaction would soon become as significant as Camilla's shocking words themselves. Camilla's voice carried clearly through the ornate dining room as she reached the most startling portion of her address. The queen consort had been speaking for nearly 10 minutes about modernizing the monarchy, but now she paused, her gaze sweeping across the assembled guests before settling on William's face. There comes a time in every institution's history when tradition must yield to necessity, she continued, her words measured and deliberate. The British monarchy has survived for over 1,000 years because it has adapted to changing times while maintaining its essential character. William felt his chest tighten as he sensed where this speech was heading. Around the room, guests who had initially been making polite conversation during dinner now focused intently on every word. The usual background murmur of such events had completely disappeared, replaced by an almost electric silence. What Camilla said next would be discussed and debated for years to come. She announced that she had been conducting private consultations with constitutional experts, historians, and government officials about restructuring the line of succession. Not to change who would inherit the throne, but to modify how royal duties and responsibilities would be distributed among family members. The implications hit William like a physical blow. This was not simply about charitable work or public appearances. Camilla was suggesting fundamental changes to the monarchy's structure that would affect his own future role and that of his children. More shocking still, these discussions had apparently been taking place without his knowledge or input. She explained that her research had convinced her the monarchy needed to become more democratic in its internal operations, with senior family members having greater input into major decisions rather than following traditional hierarchical structures. This would mean establishing something resembling a royal council, where multiple voices would contribute to policy decisions rather than having one person make unilateral choices. King Charles, sitting to her right, appeared genuinely surprised by these revelations. His facial expression shifted from polite attention to concern as he realized his wife was announcing policy positions that had never been discussed within the family. His hand gripped his walking stick more tightly as he processed the implications of her words. The constitutional ramifications of Camilla's suggestions were staggering. She was essentially proposing to democratize an institution built entirely on hereditary authority and traditional protocol. While her intentions might have been to strengthen the monarchy's relevance, her methods raised serious questions about proper procedures for initiating such discussions. William's training in royal protocol told him to maintain his composure, but internally he struggled with a mixture of shock, anger, and confusion. How had these consultations been conducted without his knowledge? Why had Camilla chosen this public forum to announce such significant proposals? Most troubling of all, what other discussions had been taking place behind closed doors? Lady Elizabeth Hartwell, watching from the side of the room, felt increasingly concerned about the evening's direction. As Camilla's private secretary, she had helped prepare the original speech about literacy programs. These constitutional proposals had never been mentioned in any of their planning sessions. Where had this material come from? And why had she not been informed? The assembled guests included several prominent political figures, members of parliament, and influential media personalities. Camilla's decision to announce these ideas in such company meant that word of her proposals would quickly spread beyond the palace walls. This was not a private family discussion that could be contained. It was a very public declaration of intent. As she continued speaking, Camilla outlined specific suggestions for modernizing royal ceremonies, streamlining the honors system, and increasing transparency in royal finances. Each proposal, while potentially beneficial, represented a dramatic departure from centuries of established practice. The scope of her vision was breathtaking in its ambition and shocking in its boldness. Archbishop of Canterbury, seated near the front of the room, listened with growing alarm. Changes to royal ceremonies would require extensive consultation with the Church of England, yet he had never been approached about any of these proposals. The constitutional relationship between Crown and Church, fundamental to British governance, was being discussed as if it could be modified through unilateral royal decision. William found himself studying his stepmother's face as she spoke, searching for clues about her motivations. Had she planned this announcement for weeks, or was it a spontaneous decision based on recent events? Either possibility was disturbing in its own way. Premeditation suggested a calculated attempt to force change through public pressure, while spontaneity implied decision-making processes that bypassed normal royal consultation procedures. The Queen Consort's proposals extended beyond constitutional matters to address the monarchy's financial structure. She suggested establishing greater oversight of royal expenditures, with regular public reporting on how taxpayer funds were utilized. While such transparency might improve public relations, implementing these changes would require extensive government approval and possibly parliamentary legislation. Lord Pemberton, observing from his position near the back of the room, recognized the historical significance of what was unfolding. In his decades of palace service, he had witnessed many significant moments in royal history, but never had he seen a senior family member announce major policy positions without apparent prior consultation with other family members or government officials. The international implications of Camilla's suggestions were equally significant. The British monarchy served as head of state for multiple Commonwealth realms, and Changes to its structure could affect relationships with Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and other nations. Constitutional modifications that seemed reasonable within Britain might create complications for countries with their own established relationships with the Crown. As Camilla moved toward the conclusion of her address, she made her most startling revelation yet. She announced that she had already begun preliminary discussions with Downing Street about implementing some of these changes during the current Parliament. This meant that what the audience had assumed were theoretical proposals were actually concrete plans already in motion. William's composure finally cracked slightly as he absorbed this information. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and those sitting closest to him noticed his hands clench briefly before he regained control. The realization that constitutional changes affecting his future role were being discussed with government officials without his knowledge represented a fundamental breach of royal protocol and family trust. The assembled guests began to understand they were witnessing a moment that would be analyzed and discussed for generations. This was not simply a disagreement about charitable priorities or public appearances. Camilla was essentially announcing a quiet revolution within the monarchy itself, one that challenged basic assumptions about how the institution operated. Dame Sarah Whitfield, a prominent constitutional lawyer among the guests, felt compelled to take notes despite the social awkwardness of doing so during a formal dinner. The legal implications of Camilla's proposals were complex and far-reaching, potentially requiring changes to multiple pieces of legislation and constitutional arrangements that had evolved over centuries. The timing of these announcements raised additional questions about Camilla's motivations and judgment. King Charles's recent health challenges had already created uncertainty about the monarchy's immediate future. Adding constitutional debates to this period of transition seemed likely to create unnecessary instability rather than strengthen the institution. William struggled to process the full implications of what he was hearing while maintaining the dignified appearance expected of the heir to the throne. His military training helped him compartmentalize his emotional reactions, but privately he was grappling with fundamental questions about trust, communication, and decision-making within his own family. The Queen Consort's speech was approaching its conclusion, but the reverberations from her words would continue long after the last guest departed. She had transformed what should have been a routine charitable gala into a constitutional earthquake that would reshape discussions about the monarchy's future for months or years to come. As Camilla prepared to leave the podium, the room remained eerily quiet. The usual polite applause that followed royal speeches was notably absent, replaced by a stunned silence as guests processed what they had just witnessed. This was clearly not the evening anyone had expected when they accepted their invitations to what should have been a standard royal charity event. The immediate aftermath would test every aspect of royal protocol and family relationships as the implications of Camilla's unprecedented announcement began to unfold. The moments immediately following Camilla's speech felt suspended in time. She stepped away from the podium with the same graceful composure she had maintained throughout her unprecedented address. But the atmosphere in the grand dining room had fundamentally shifted. What had begun as a celebration of charitable achievements had become something entirely different, a public declaration that would reshape the royal family's future. William remained seated at the head table, his expression carefully neutral despite the turmoil building within him. Years of royal training had taught him to mask personal reactions during public events, but those who knew him well could detect subtle signs of distress. His breathing had become slightly more controlled, his posture more rigid, as he processed the full implications of what had just occurred. King Charles attempted to restore some normalcy to the proceedings by rising to offer closing remarks. His voice carried its usual authority, but careful observers noticed a slight tremor as he thanked the guests for their continued support of royal charitable initiatives. He made no direct reference to Camilla's constitutional proposals, choosing instead to focus on safer ground about community service and philanthropy. The king's diplomatic response highlighted the immediate challenge facing the royal family. How could they address what had just happened without either endorsing positions they had never discussed or publicly contradicting the Queen Consort? The carefully maintained unity that characterized public royal appearances had been shattered by Camilla's unilateral announcement. As the formal program concluded and guests began to mingle during the reception portion of the evening, conversations buzzed with speculation about what they had witnessed. Dame Margaret Thornfield, a longtime family friend, approached William with evident concern in her eyes. Her whispered words of support only emphasized how dramatically the evening had departed from royal norms. The palace staff, trained to anticipate and manage unexpected situations, found themselves in uncharted territory. Head butler James Morrison gathered his team for a brief conference in the service corridor, emphasizing the absolute importance of discretion about anything they had observed. However, they all understood that containing the story would be impossible given the number of influential guests who had witnessed Camilla's speech. Lord Pemberton faced the challenging task of managing the evening's conclusion while processing the constitutional implications of what had occurred. His experience told him that this moment would be analyzed and debated for decades, making accurate record-keeping essential. Yet the unprecedented nature of the situation left him uncertain about proper procedures for documenting such events. William's private secretary, Oliver Manning, discreetly approached his employer to discuss immediate next steps. Their brief conversation, conducted in low tones near a portrait of Queen Victoria, focused on managing the inevitable media interest while maintaining family dignity. Both men understood that the coming days would test every aspect of royal crisis management protocols. The international media representatives present at the gala began making discreet phone calls to their editors, recognizing the global significance of the story they had just witnessed. However, royal protocol prevented them from leaving the event early or openly discussing what they had heard until the evening officially concluded. Camilla herself moved through the reception with apparent calm, engaging guests in normal social conversation as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. This behavior struck many observers as particularly remarkable, suggesting either complete confidence in her actions or a sophisticated understanding of how to manage the immediate aftermath of controversial statements. Several Commonwealth High Commissioners present at the event exchanged concerned glances as they contemplated the implications for their respective nations. Changes to the British monarchy's structure could affect constitutional arrangements across multiple countries, yet none of them had received any advance warning about potential modifications to established relationships. The Archbishop of Canterbury found himself in an especially delicate position, as many of Camilla's proposals would require ecclesiastical approval and coordination. His attempts to approach her for clarification were politely deflected, leaving him to wonder about the proper response to suggestions that could fundamentally alter the relationship between Crown and Church. William's internal struggle became more evident as the evening progressed. Several guests noted his increasingly distant demeanor during conversations, as if his mind was elsewhere processing recent events. His responses to casual questions about royal activities became shorter and more perfunctory, lacking his usual warmth and engagement. The security personnel monitoring the event reported heightened tension among the royal family members, though nothing that suggested immediate safety concerns. Their primary worry was managing the departure process to prevent any awkward encounters between family members and aggressive media representatives who might be waiting outside. Lady Elizabeth Hartwell spent much of the reception period trying to understand how the evening had evolved so dramatically from what had been planned. Her conversations with other palace staff revealed that no one else had advanced knowledge of Camilla's constitutional proposals, suggesting they represented a closely held personal initiative rather than a coordinated family strategy. As guests began to depart, many lingered longer than usual, reluctant to leave what they recognized as a historically significant event. The normal rhythm of royal social functions, where departures followed established protocols, was disrupted by the extraordinary nature of what had occurred and the natural human desire to witness its immediate aftermath. The diplomatic corps present at the event faced the challenge of reporting back to their respective governments about developments that could affect bilateral relationships with Britain. Camilla's proposals for modernizing the monarchy might seem positive in principle, but their potential implementation raised questions about stability and continuity in international partnerships. William's departure from the reception area was noted by many observers as occurring earlier than would normally be expected. His brief conversations with palace staff suggested urgent consultations were needed, though the specific nature of these discussions remained private. The heir to the throne clearly recognized that immediate action was required to address the evening's developments. King Charles's own departure followed soon after, supported by his personal aide as fatigue from the evening's stress became evident. The king's health challenges made lengthy social functions difficult under normal circumstances, and the unexpected drama of Camilla's announcement had added considerable strain to what should have been a routine royal obligation. The final guests to leave included several constitutional experts and political figures who understood the long-term implications of what they had witnessed. Their hushed conversations in the palace courtyard focused on procedural questions about how constitutional changes could be implemented and what approvals would be required from various government bodies. Security footage from the evening would later be analyzed extensively by palace officials trying to understand the timeline of events and identify any signs they might have missed about Camilla's intentions. However, most observers agreed that her announcement had been skillfully concealed until the moment of delivery, suggesting careful planning rather than spontaneous decision-making. The immediate media response began within hours of the event's conclusion, as journalists worked to verify details and seek official statements from palace representatives. However, the unprecedented nature of the situation left royal press officials uncertain about appropriate responses, since traditional crisis management protocols had not anticipated this type of internal constitutional challenge. Private phones throughout London buzzed with calls between government officials, constitutional experts, and royal household staff as news of the evening's events spread through elite circles. The realization that the monarchy might be entering a period of significant change created urgent needs for consultation and planning among those responsible for managing such transitions. William's journey home to Adelaide Cottage that evening would provide his first opportunity for private reflection on the day's events. The short drive through Windsor Great Park offered a temporary respite from public observation, but also intensified his contemplation of the challenges that lay ahead for his family and the institution he was destined to lead. The silence that had characterized his response to Camilla's announcement would soon become as significant as her words themselves, as observers analyzed every aspect of his reaction for clues about the royal family's internal dynamics and future direction. The morning following the gala dawned gray and misty over Windsor Castle, matching the somber mood that had settled over the royal household. By 7 o'clock, urgent consultations were already underway as palace officials grappled with the unprecedented situation created by Queen Camilla's shocking announcements. The usual rhythm of royal life had been completely disrupted by events that no protocol manual had ever anticipated. William arrived at the castle earlier than scheduled, his Range Rover pulling through the Henry VIII gate as staff members were still preparing for what everyone knew would be an extraordinarily difficult day. His decision to drive himself rather than use his usual protection detail suggested a desire for privacy during the short journey from Adelaide Cottage, perhaps his last moments of solitude before confronting the constitutional crisis that now engulfed his family. The Prince of Wales went directly to his private study, a book-lined sanctuary where he had often retreated during challenging periods throughout his life. This morning, however, even the familiar comfort of his favorite photographs and personal mementos could not ease the weight of responsibility that pressed down upon him. The heir to the throne faced a situation that threatened the very foundations of the institution he would one day lead. King Charles had spent a sleepless night at Clarence House, his personal physicians monitoring his condition as stress from the previous evening's events took its toll on his already fragile health. Palace staff reported that he had requested copies of constitutional documents and legal precedents, desperately seeking guidance for a situation that had no historical parallel in modern royal experience. Sir Clive Alderton, the king's private secretary, had been fielding phone calls since dawn from government officials seeking clarification about the royal family's position on Camilla's proposals. Each conversation became more difficult than the last, as he struggled to explain developments that he himself did not fully understand. The careful balance between palace and government that had evolved over decades was suddenly threatened by uncertainty about royal intentions and procedures. The Queen Consort herself remained at Highgrove House, apparently unmoved by the chaos her announcement had created. Staff members reported that she had risen at her usual time, enjoyed breakfast in her private sitting room, and seemed to be proceeding with her normal routine despite the constitutional earthquake she had triggered. This calm demeanor struck many observers as either remarkably confident or troublingly disconnected from the gravity of the situation. Media attention intensified throughout the morning as news of the previous evening's events spread beyond the initial circle of witnesses. Television crews gathered outside royal residences, while newspapers prepared special editions to cover what many were already calling the most significant royal story in decades. The palace press office found itself overwhelmed with requests for official statements about developments they were still trying to understand themselves. William's first official meeting of the day was with Oliver Manning, his private secretary, who presented a detailed analysis of the legal and constitutional implications of Camilla's proposals. The briefing papers spread across the mahogany desk in the prince's study painted a complex picture of potential consequences that extended far beyond the immediate royal family to affect government operations and international relationships. The constitutional lawyers consulted during the early morning hours had identified multiple areas where Camilla's suggested changes would require parliamentary approval, judicial review, or international treaty modifications. Her proposals for democratizing royal decision-making, while potentially appealing in principle, would necessitate fundamental alterations to centuries of established law and custom. Most disturbing to William was the revelation that preliminary discussions with government officials had indeed taken place, as Camilla had announced. These consultations had apparently occurred through informal channels, bypassing normal procedures for royal government coordination. The heir to the throne felt not only personally betrayed, but professionally undermined by decisions that affected his future role being discussed without his knowledge or input. Sir Edward Young, who served as the sovereign's private secretary emeritus, was summoned to provide historical perspective on the crisis. His decades of experience with royal protocol offered some guidance, but even his extensive knowledge provided no clear precedent for managing a situation where a senior royal family member had unilaterally announced major constitutional changes. The international implications continued to multiply as Commonwealth governments sought clarification about how potential changes to the British monarchy might affect their own constitutional arrangements. High commissioners from Canada, Australia, and New Zealand had already requested urgent briefings, while smaller Commonwealth realms expressed concern about stability in their relationships with the Crown. William's attempts to reach his stepmother by telephone were unsuccessful, with staff at Highgrove indicating that she was not accepting calls from family members. This communication breakdown added another layer of complexity to an already difficult situation, preventing the private conversations that might have offered some path toward resolution or at least mutual understanding. The Prince of Wales found himself studying constitutional documents that he had not examined in detail since his university years, searching for precedents or procedures that might guide the royal family through this unprecedented crisis. His legal training, though limited, helped him appreciate the complexity of the challenges they faced, but also highlighted how unprepared the monarchy was for internal constitutional disputes. Catherine's absence from London, as she continued her recovery at Adelaide Cottage, deprived William of his most trusted advisor during this critical period. Their brief phone conversations provided emotional support, but could not substitute for the in-person consultations that had guided them through previous challenges. The Princess of Wales's own constitutional role meant that these developments affected her family's future as directly as they did William's. Palace security was quietly enhanced as officials worried about potential demonstrations or media disruptions outside royal residences. The unprecedented nature of the situation made threat assessment difficult, since security protocols had been designed for external challenges rather than internal constitutional disputes that might attract various forms of public attention. The Archbishop of Canterbury requested an urgent audience with King Charles to discuss the religious implications of Camilla's proposals. Changes to royal ceremonies and constitutional arrangements could affect the Church of England's role as the established church, potentially requiring extensive consultation with other religious leaders and possibly Parliament itself. Government officials at Downing Street found themselves in an equally challenging position, caught between their constitutional duty to advise the Crown and their uncertainty about which royal family members actually spoke with authority on these matters. The Prime Minister's office began preparing briefing papers on various scenarios, though none of the established crisis management protocols seemed adequate for the current situation. William's lunch appointment with several Commonwealth High Commissioners became an exercise in diplomatic damage control. His attempts to reassure international partners about continuity in royal relationships were hampered by his own uncertainty about his family's internal dynamics and decision-making processes. The meetings, originally scheduled to discuss routine bilateral issues, instead became emergency consultations about constitutional stability. The afternoon brought a stream of visitors to William's study, including constitutional experts, government representatives, and senior palace officials, all seeking guidance about how to proceed. Each conversation revealed new layers of complexity in the legal and political challenges created by Camilla's announcement, while offering few clear solutions for managing the immediate crisis. Lord Pemberton presented a detailed timeline of the previous evening's events, having worked through the night to ensure accurate documentation of what had occurred. His report would become a crucial historical record, but also served as a sobering reminder of how dramatically royal life had been disrupted by a single speech that had lasted less than 20 minutes. As evening approached, William faced the reality that his stepmother's actions had fundamentally altered the trajectory of the monarchy's future. The careful plans and gradual transitions that had been envisioned for his eventual accession to the throne were now overshadowed by constitutional questions that demanded immediate attention and resolution. The silence he had maintained during and after Camilla's announcement was becoming increasingly difficult to sustain. Political and media pressure for an official royal response was mounting, while family relationships deteriorated further with each passing hour of failed communication. The heir to the throne would soon be forced to choose between family loyalty and constitutional responsibility, a decision that would define both his character and the monarchy's future direction. The weight of these choices pressed down upon William as he prepared for what would likely be the most challenging period of his royal service, knowing that his next actions could determine whether the ancient institution he was destined to inherit would emerge from this crisis stronger or permanently weaken. 3 days after the gala, the constitutional crisis had deepened into something that threatened the very stability of the British monarchy. William sat in his father's private study at Windsor Castle, surrounded by legal documents, constitutional precedents, and urgent correspondence from government officials across the Commonwealth. The weight of nearly 1,000 years of royal history seemed to press down upon his shoulders as he prepared for the most difficult conversation of his life. King Charles had requested this meeting despite his physician's concerns about stress affecting his recovery. The monarch appeared friendlier than William had ever seen him, but his eyes retained the sharp intelligence that had guided him through decades of royal service. Between them lay the unspoken recognition that this crisis could determine not only the future of their family, but the survival of the constitutional monarchy itself. The past 72 hours had brought a cascade of developments that had pushed the situation beyond any possibility of quiet resolution. Media coverage had exploded across international headlines, with constitutional experts debating the implications of Camilla's proposals on television programs and newspaper editorial pages around the world. The story had evolved from royal family drama into a serious discussion about democratic governance and inherited authority. Government officials had grown increasingly concerned about the lack of clarity regarding the royal family's official position. The Prime Minister had requested a formal audience to discuss the constitutional implications, while opposition leaders demanded parliamentary debates about the monarchy's role in modern Britain. What had begun as Camilla's personal initiative had become a matter of national political importance. Commonwealth governments had expressed varying degrees of alarm about potential changes to their constitutional arrangements. The Prime Minister of Canada had issued a carefully worded statement emphasizing that any modifications to the monarchy's role would require extensive consultation and approval from all affected nations. Australia's government had gone further, suggesting that unilateral changes could prompt renewed Republican discussions. The international legal implications had proven even more complex than initially anticipated. Treaties and agreements spanning centuries had been built upon specific understandings about royal authority and constitutional procedures. Camilla's proposals for democratizing royal decision-making could potentially invalidate dozens of international agreements and require renegotiation of fundamental diplomatic relationships. William had spent hours in consultation with Dame Sarah Whitfield and other constitutional experts, trying to understand the full scope of the challenges they faced. Each legal opinion had revealed new complications, making clear that resolving this crisis would require unprecedented cooperation between the royal family, government officials, and international partners. The most painful aspect of the situation remained the complete breakdown in communication with Camilla. Her continued refusal to discuss her announcement with family members had prevented any possibility of finding common ground or developing coordinated responses to the growing political pressure. Staff at Highgrove reported that she remained determined to pursue her constitutional agenda despite the chaos it had created. King Charles broke the heavy silence that had settled over the room as both men contemplated the gravity of their situation. His voice, though weakened by recent health challenges, carried the authority of someone who had dedicated his entire life to royal service. He began by acknowledging that his wife's actions had placed the monarchy in an impossible position, one that required immediate and decisive response. The king's words revealed the depth of his personal anguish over the crisis. He spoke of his love for Camilla and his appreciation for her years of dedicated service to the crown, but also his recognition that her unilateral constitutional initiative had violated fundamental principles of royal governance. The conflict between his roles as husband and sovereign had created an internal struggle that was visible in his weary expression. William listened with growing understanding as his father outlined the limited options available to them. They could either endorse Camilla's proposals and risk destabilizing relationships with government and Commonwealth partners, or they could publicly distance themselves from her announcement and face the humiliation of family disunity playing out on the international stage. The conversation revealed details about the background to Camilla's announcement that had not been previously disclosed even to senior palace officials. King Charles admitted that his wife had expressed frustration with traditional royal protocols during private conversations, but he had never anticipated that these discussions would lead to such dramatic public action. The revelation added another layer of complexity to an already difficult family dynamic. As they discussed potential responses, both men recognized that their decision would establish precedents for how the monarchy handled internal constitutional disputes in the future. The careful balance between unity and individual expression that had characterized royal life for generations was being tested in ways that previous monarchs had never faced. The immediate political pressure had reached a critical point where silence was no longer a viable strategy. Media speculation about divisions within the royal family had begun affecting public confidence in the institution, while international partners demanded clarity about Britain's constitutional direction. The luxury of private family resolution had been eliminated by the public nature of Camilla's original announcement. William's response to his father's request for guidance revealed the emotional cost of the crisis on the heir to the throne. His voice carried a weariness that reflected not only the immediate challenges, but also his recognition of how this situation would affect his own future reign. The prince spoke of his duty to preserve the monarchy for future generations, even when that duty required painful personal choices. The decision they reached during this private meeting would later be described as one of the most significant moments in modern royal history. After hours of discussion, father and son agreed that the constitutional integrity of the monarchy must take precedence over personal relationships, no matter how cherished those relationships might be. Their plan required William to break his silence about Camilla's announcement through a carefully crafted public statement that would address both the constitutional issues and the family dynamics involved. This response would need to balance respect for the Queen Consort's service with clear boundaries about proper procedures for constitutional change. The statement, drafted with assistance from constitutional experts and government advisors, would acknowledge the importance of discussing the monarchy's future while emphasizing that such conversations must follow established protocols and include all relevant stakeholders. William's words would need to restore confidence in royal governance without unnecessarily humiliating his stepmother. The emotional cost of this decision was evident in both men as they concluded their meeting. King Charles's health concerns made the stress of family conflict particularly dangerous, while William faced the prospect of a public confrontation with someone who had been part of his family for nearly 2 decades. Neither man took pleasure in the course of action they had chosen. The announcement was scheduled for the following morning, giving palace officials time to coordinate with government representatives and Commonwealth partners about the royal family's official response. Security preparations were enhanced in anticipation of increased media attention and potential public demonstrations outside royal residences. As evening fell over Windsor Castle, William walked alone through the Long Walk, the ancient avenue stretching toward the distant horizon. This solitary journey provided his final opportunity for private reflection before stepping into the most challenging public role of his royal career. The weight of history and the burden of future responsibility had never felt more acute. The prince's silent struggle during Camilla's original announcement had revealed everything about his character and priorities. His grief was not just for family relationships that had been damaged, but for the institution he loved and was destined to serve. The coming dawn would bring the moment when his silence finally broke, releasing words that would reshape the British monarchy for generations to come. The ancient stones of Windsor Castle had witnessed centuries of royal crises, but few had tested the monarchy's foundations as severely as the events that would unfold in the hours ahead. William's response to his stepmother's stunning action would either restore stability to the institution or accelerate its evolution into something entirely new. The heir to the throne carried the weight of that choice as he prepared to step from silence into history.